You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is September 14th, 2025, and this is another episode of Lighthearted Light, where we take a look back at interviews from the past 6 years. Today we're going to listen to an edited version of a conversation that was first heard in episode 62 back in May 2020. The guest is Elaine Jones, and the subject is Burnt Island Light in Maine. A lighthouse was built in 1821 on 5-acre Burnt Island at the west side of the entrance to Boothbay Harbor in Maine, which was a center for shipbuilding, gristmills, and fishing going back to the 1700s. In 1962, Burnt Island Light became the last lighthouse in New England to be converted from kerosene to electricity. Then, in 1988, it became one of the last Maine light stations to be automated and destaffed. In 1998, as part of the Maine Lights Program, the Maine Lighthouse Selection Committee approved the transfer of Burnt Island Light to the Maine Department of Marine Resources. Elaine Jones was named the director of the new facility when the state acquired the Burnt Island Light Station. It was her vision to transform the island into an outstanding educational and recreational facility for Maine's residents and its visitors. Elaine Jones was honored with a Keeper of the Light Award from the American Lighthouse Foundation in 2019. She retired in 2021 after 30 years with the Department of Marine Resources. In fact, her last day of work was the exact 200th anniversary of the first lighting of Burnt Island Light on November 9th, 1821. Let's listen to my conversation with Elaine Jones now. Could you tell us about how you became involved with Burnt Island? I understand you became involved with the Maine Lights Program in 1996. Could you tell us about what happened at that time?
Sure. There was an evening in, I think it was July in 1996. I happened to be watching the news that night, and that didn't happen very often because I had 3 young children. And they announced the Maine Lights Program. And my job with the department had one component of it was teaching teachers, doing recertification courses for teachers. And I could never find a place for them to stay. Boothbay Harbor was very expensive, and every place I went that was really good coastal places, we couldn't afford it. And so when this announcement came up that, wow, there's going to be it was 32 lighthouses that were offered, it just, the light bulb went on. I said, what better place to teach teachers or the public or school kids but at a lighthouse? I took the name down. Peter Ralston of the Island Institute was being interviewed. I didn't know Peter at that time, so I quickly wrote his name down. Back then, I went to the phone, called the operator, and said, Peter Ralston in Rockland, Maine, and they connected me to Peter. Well, they were celebrating. He was having a party because he, too, was watching this announcement on the television. And he said, look, why don't you call me on Monday? He said, we'll talk more about it then. So I said, okay. So I called him on Monday. And he said, why don't you go out and look at Burnt Island because you're in Boothbay Harbor? And my reaction was, an island? That did not come into play as far as I was concerned. It was like something on the mainland where you could easily get to, et cetera, et cetera. So he says, yeah. He said, go out to Burnt Island. And I said, okay. So I got a skiff, and another person and we went out to the island, brought it up onto the boat slip, and I stepped off that boat and started walking, and I fell in love. I never thought I could fall in love with an island, and it happened. The houses had been boarded up, for 10 years, but the island itself had every educational component that a teacher would dream about. And the rocky shore was there, the beach was there, the mud flat was there, the meadow, the forest. It was all right there on 5 acres and only a mile and a half from the DMR lab where I was stationed in the summertime. That was it for me. The rest is history.
Yeah. It is definitely one of the most picturesque island light stations on the New England coast. There's no doubt about that. So once the DMR was convinced to take on Burnt Island, could you tell us about how the effort was launched to restore the Burnt Island Light Station and start the educational programs that you started there?
Sure. The convincing part was, I would just say, I don't know how to word that exactly, but they didn't want to take on extra properties. They didn't want to take on boats, and administrators don't like doing things like that. And so I worked very hard as to how I was going to approach them with this. And I did, and I was successful. And I think it was only because I had been successful building an aquarium with no money, no plans, no nothing, that they trusted that I could probably handle this as well. And I brought out the deputy commissioner. There was somebody from the federal government that was visiting the DMR at that time, and he came out too. And he kind of encouraged the deputy and said, why don't you try it? If she's willing and you know she's able, why don't you try it? And so that's what occurred. So I did take it on. First, I needed to get an operational site. You know, there was no water, no septic, no heat, no nothing out there. And so that took some grant writing and some convincing of donors to come on board, that this was worth the fight.
And how was it decided that you would restore the place to 1950 as the era to concentrate on?
Well, I knew that everything had to be done according to historic standards, and if you were going to change anything, that you had to pick a period of time. So I had done my research. I'd been to Washington, D.C. twice, to the archives, to the Coast Guard historian, to the cartographic branch. I had been to the New England archives in Waltham, Massachusetts. I'd been to the civil engineering unit in Providence, to Boston. I'd been in Maine, and there's many places I could go. Any repository that might have something on Burnt Island, I went. I also was successful in finding 14 former keepers or the families of those keepers, and that was amazing because I could now get their personal stories and their personal photographs. So that was really good. But, okay, so why did I choose 1950? Because I found the best documentation. It was the civil engineering unit in Providence that did it for me. They had a drawing there that was October 1950. It had both external and internal architectural sketches of the station at that time. They're also within their files, I found some negatives, and I asked them, could I please borrow these and get them printed up. When they were printed, there was, I think, about 14 or 15 photos. The calendar on the kitchen wall said August 1950. So now I had internal, external photographs of the station, an architectural drawing of 1950. I had everything I needed to give the State Historic Preservation Officer to proceed. And I then also found the family who had lived there, which was the Muse family. Yeah. And so they came back in 1999 to visit me, and it had been almost 50 years since they'd been there. And with their stories, that clinched the deal. I knew it was going to be 1950. Right.
They were there for how long? When did they first get out there?
They were there for 15 years. They got there from 1936 to 1951.
And, of course, one of the really unique things about the tours that you've had for quite a few years now at Burnt Island is the emphasis on living history. And, of course, the family of Keeper Joseph Muse himself and his family are portrayed in the living history tours. So Joseph Muse has been such an important person in the history of that station and continues to be an important person at Burnt Island. What inspired you to develop the living history program? Obviously, the Muse family had a lot to do with the inspiration of that.
Yes, they did. But prior to that, there were two things. One, I had visited a lighthouse keeper's dwelling in Maine, and I went into it, and it was a museum, and I could have been in the middle of New York City. It was not what I had expected. I expected going into this historic building, I was going to see what it looked like at a certain time. And so I was disappointed with that, and I never forgot that. And then the second piece was we went on a family vacation to Nova Scotia, and we visited the Halifax, the Citadel there at Halifax. My children were young, being, 8, 10, 12, or something like that. Bringing them to museums, they didn't always interest them. But when we got there, they did a reenactment at the fort. Well, it captivated them. They were so into it that I thought, wow, look at this. They're learning something and they're having fun at the same time. This really works. And so when Burnt Island then came into my life, I just remembered that. I said, I got to entertain and educate. People are on vacation or kids are coming through and they'd love to be entertained. And so that was the beginning.
What do you think is the value of a living history program at a place like Burnt Island?
Yeah, it's those two factors of education, entertainment, but it's also real stories, okay? Everything we tell the public is real. Then it comes from the muses. And so I had a videographer the day they came ashore. Willard was in a wheelchair. He was close to 80 at that time with an oxygen tank. And so, his three sisters. And as they visited each part of the island, they continued to tell their stories that I knew would fascinate the public. And so that's what we scripted our program based on their stories.
Yeah, I recently interviewed Katie Bryden, who was one of your early living history performers. She was a joy to talk to, her enthusiasm and everything. It made me think about how more places could make use of this kind of thing. But I also thought maybe it's a little bit tricky, because if you're going to do it, you kind of have to do it well. And you've done it really, really well at Burnt Island. You really have.
Well, thank you.
I'm wondering if you could give our listeners an idea of how the tours basically work, if you could describe what it's like from the time people board the boat in Boothbay Harbor and go out to the island.
Sure. The Balmy Day Cruises is the name of the company that transports the groups out to Burnt Island. The boat is called the Novelty. They arrive, and the folks spend 2.5 hours on the island with us, which some of them say, we think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of time, but they then are amazed that it's gone by so fast because they've enjoyed the program so much. When they come ashore, I have a little amphitheater that they seat themselves down to, and we welcome them and introduce the program, tell them what the experience is going to be like, break them into 3 groups, and then they head off, one group to the Lighthouse, one group to the house, and one group go with the children, and they visit the oil house, the boathouse, and then there's a rotation that occurs. So about every 20 minutes, they move from one station to another until they've seen all 3, and then they have the opportunity to visit the lantern room, climb the spiral stairs, and go up, and the keeper will be up into the lantern room and explain to them the past versus the present. The other group gets to visit when they get done with the house. We have the covered walkway, which is the passage that connects the house to the lighthouse. It was boarded off when the Coast Guard automated, but we use that passageway as a museum. So all of our architectural drawings and photographs are on display there. And I also have one section of a wall called the Wall of Keepers. So all of the lighthouse keepers, I think the oldest one I have on is James McCobb, and he was there 1876 to 1880. And so I tell a little bit about each one of those keepers there as well. And then the children also offer a guided tour, so if they want to go around the island, they can do that. And they come back, and some of them just sit around, enjoy, relax. And we also, of course, have a gift shop, so they get to visit that and help us out by buying a few Burnt Island memorabilia.
Right. Exit through the gift shop, right?
Right.
Yeah. The tours also incorporate the natural environment, and that's obviously an important part of Burnt Island itself. And it's very appropriate that the tours incorporate that, and that gets to use some of your personal background, of course. What are people likely to see in the natural environment at Burnt Island?
Well, first, it all depends on the stage of the tide, because, of course, at low tide, they're going to see a lot more than at high tide. But when that water has receded, right at the peninsula where the Lighthouse is located, there's wonderful tide pools down there. And so that's a great intertidal search that can take place. We don't usually take the public down there. We sometimes take a tub, and we put a few of the things that they might find, because we don't want anybody slipping down on the seaweed down there. So we incorporate it that way and show them what some of the living creatures are and some of the algae forms that are there. They continue on their walk, and we get to a place, there's a seawall where there's a berm of cobblestones between two other peninsulas on that south shore. So we talk about how, the geology of the island, when the rocks break up and then these pieces get caught between the peninsulas, and it's just like a rock tumbler. They just keep tossing and tossing until they become smooth cobblestones. And then as they walk the perimeter trail, we pass an osprey nest and go to a couple of places where they can see that western shore, which has just phenomenal geology there with the tipping of the stones, the bedrock there. And then they come back through the woods a little bit where the old man's beard hangs from the trees, which is a pretty unique growth of islands, and then back into the meadow and back to the buildings. They can also go down to the beach area. There's a gravel beach, and if it's low tide, there's a mud flat that's there too. So there's plenty of nature to observe and experience.
Could you tell us about the nonprofit, the Keepers of Burnt Island Light, the nonprofit organization that supports the preservation of Burnt Island and the light station?
They formed right from the beginning. When I acquired Burnt Island, Jean McKay was a retired teacher who had just moved to Boothbay Harbor, and she saw it in the newspaper, and she called me, and she said, I just saw about the transfer of the Lighthouse to the state, and I'm interested in helping you. And I said, well, great. And she says, well, when would you like to see me? And I said, well, what are you doing now? And she said, well, nothing. I said, well, come on over. So we went over to Burnt Island and went onto the boat slip. And she was from New York. And the minute she stepped off onto the little walkway on the boat slip, she slipped and fell into the ocean. I always say her baptism was that day, and her baptism that day. And I said to her, would you like to go back? She was wet. This was like May. And she goes, but she was laughing, and she said, no, I'm fine. I'm just fine. And I thought to myself, okay, this woman didn't complain. She laughed, and she stayed the whole time and said, when can I come back? So I said, I got to keep hold of her. And so I did. And so Jean has been my sidekick for 22 years. And in 2008, is when she and a bunch of the other local people, especially some of the people that were interpreters for the program for the Living History, they banded together and said, let's do a nonprofit, because at least we can raise money in ways that the state cannot, and take donations in the ways that the state cannot. And so they formed the Keepers of the Burnt Island Light. They have been very helpful in all aspects, and there's 9 board members ranging from a retired contractor, a current contractor, a teacher, an attorney, some retirees, and we were fortunate enough to recruit the commanding officer of Station Boothbay Harbor for the Coast Guard. So Adam Smart is also part of our board. Yeah, they're amazing, and they help in endless ways.
So are the Keepers of Burnt Island Light looking for new volunteers currently? Always looking for, especially interpreters, and we do love teachers, either summer teachers, retired teachers, people who
know how to handle, the people, the public, kids, and teachers have a special knack. I mean, others can learn. Others are great also in their acting, as you saw from Katie Bryden when you spoke to her. She was a drama major, and so she did an excellent job. We also, every other Monday, I take out a group of gardeners and just handy people. They don't have to be all master gardeners, but they do an amazing job of keeping the island mowed and weed whacked and planting gardens and all of that. And so, that's a source of people we're always looking for.
And one thing I just want to mention that I was just thinking about, you and I have discussed this before, but Burnt Island Lighthouse, the tower itself, the lantern was changed in its history, right? But
Correct.
The tower is the oldest unchanged lighthouse tower in Maine, 1821. Portland Head Lighthouse is older except for the fact that it was raised in height. It actually went up and down a couple of times in its history in height. So because Portland Head Light, the tower itself, was changed a couple of times, Burnt Island Light qualifies as the oldest unchanged lighthouse tower. Again, we're not talking about the fact that the lantern was changed, but
that's correct.
Yeah,
the tower itself is original,
right?
And it the other little piece I also just want to put in there, Jeremy, is when Portland Headlight was built, it was part of Massachusetts. Okay.
Well, there's that too. Yeah.
No, but all in fun. Maine became a state this is the bicentennial year 2020.
Right.
So when Burnt Island was built, it was actually the 8th station I think it was the 9th station. 3 of them were funded at the same year of 1821, but it was the 9th station to open up. But all 2 through 8 have all been rebuilt completely. With Portland having been altered. Okay,
Elaine, I have one more question for you for bonus points. What for you have been the most fun and rewarding parts of your involvement with Burnt Island Light Station?
Okay, well, there's so many. After 22 years, I have so many. I'm going to say, when I look at photographs of 1998, when I acquired Burnt Island, and I look at it now, a building that was boarded up for 10 years, a building that really just sat there. It needed so much work, and it wasn't very pretty. And today, it's absolutely gorgeous. And meeting all of the former keepers who once served there, because I truly can relate to them. And I'm also proud that this year I surpassed the keeper with the longest tenure there, which is William Stetson, was there for 21 years, and I'm on my 22nd this year. But I want to say, even though the buildings and everything was so beautiful, I think, to me, the most fun, I'll go with fun, is to be able to host school children and teachers there as part of overnight experiential learning opportunities that I give them are phenomenal. They are second to none. These kids get to live on this island. They get to explore all those habitats that I mentioned. They get to learn about this lighthouse and go up into the lantern room at nighttime, which to them is they are like amazed that they're in this lantern room and say, can people see us? Can they see us up here? And then I take them to the water in the dark, and we swish in the water to see the bioluminescence. I can't tell you how exciting that is for them and for me. And so for me to impart my knowledge of the marine environment of this historic site with them is so much fun. And I look forward to having them every single year enjoy this with me.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Elaine Jones. You know, you are a true lighthouse keeper, a true 21st century lighthouse keeper in the best sense of the term. And I thank you and congratulate you on everything you've done for Burnt Island and for the lighthouse community and for the state of Maine, for the children and the public. And thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Today you can visit Burnt Island on tours from the Maine Maritime Museum in Bath. You can also get there with Balmy Days cruises out of Boothbay Harbor on selected days in the summer. The trips include 2 hours on the island with a guided tour. Check out Balmy Days Cruises, that's BALMY, dayscruises.com to learn more. Boothbay Harbor is one of the prettiest towns and harbors on the Maine coast, and Burnt Island is a very scenic old light station. I've visited several times over the years, including last year on a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour. It's always a great experience, and I recommend it if you're planning a trip to Maine. Be sure to check out uslhs.org to learn more about preservation grants, the research catalog, and everything the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. If you work in the field of historic preservation as a volunteer or staff member, thank you for all you do. We are all on the same team. We'll be back with a new episode next Sunday featuring a discussion of Portsmouth Harbor Light in New Hampshire, which happens to be about 15 minutes from my home here. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and keep a good light.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.